What if we told you that one of Hollywood's most romantic ghost stories was originally supposed to star Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, involved a real broken foot hidden by period costumes, and featured a TV series where Charles Nelson Reilly made his Terror of the Captain a running gag on game shows? From abandoned remakes with Sean Connery to Bernard Herrmann calling it his Max Steiner score, The Ghost, Mrs. Muir hides secrets more shocking than any supernatural encounter. Fact 1. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn were the original stars. Before Gene Tierney and Rex Harrison brought their unforgettable chemistry to The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Hollywood's most beloved romantic duo was supposed to headline this supernatural love story. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, fresh off their success in films like Woman of the Year and Adam's Rib, were originally slated to play the leads in what would have been their 10th collaboration together. The pairing made perfect sense to studio executives at 20th Century Fox, who recognized that Tracy and Hepburn's legendary on-screen romance could bring a unique depth to the story of a widow falling in love with a ghost. Their real-life relationship, which was carefully hidden from the public at the time, had already translated into box office gold multiple times, and the studio was eager to capitalize on their proven formula once again. However, the project hit an unexpected snag when Spencer Tracy decided to withdraw from the film. The exact reasons for his departure remain somewhat mysterious, but industry insiders suggest that Tracy may have had concerns about the supernatural elements of the story or scheduling conflicts with other commitments. Whatever the cause, his decision to leave the project had immediate consequences for his longtime partner. True to form, Katharine Hepburn followed Tracy's lead and also dropped out of the production. Their professional partnership was so intertwined that when one left a project, the other typically followed suit. This left 20th Century Fox scrambling to find new leads for their romantic fantasy film. The studio's search eventually led them to Gene Tierney, who was coming off her acclaimed performance in Laura, and Rex Harrison, the British actor who would bring his own sophisticated charm to the role of Captain Gregg. While we can only imagine what Tracy and Hepburn might have brought to these iconic roles, their departure ultimately paved the way for what many consider one of cinema's most haunting and beautiful love stories. Fact 2. Gene Tierney, filmed with a hidden broken foot. Gene Tierney's graceful performance as Lucy Muir becomes even more remarkable when you learn that she completed much of the filming while nursing a painful broken foot that was carefully concealed beneath her period costumes. What should have been a routine day of shooting in February 1947 turned into a production nightmare when Tierney suffered the injury in an on-set accident. The timing of the accident couldn't have been worse for the production schedule. Filming had already begun at locations in Palos Verdes and Monterey, California, and the studio was under pressure to stay on budget and meet their release deadline. When news of Tierney's injury reached the producers, they faced a difficult decision about whether to halt production entirely or find a way to work around her condition. Rather than shut down filming and potentially lose thousands of dollars, the production team made the bold choice to continue shooting with Tierney wearing a cast. The costume department worked closely with the medical team to ensure that her foot cast could be completely hidden beneath the long skirts and dresses that were typical of early 1900s fashion. The flowing fabrics and floor-length hemlines of the period proved to be the perfect camouflage for her medical equipment. Despite the constant pain and the awkwardness of maneuvering with a cast, Tierney refused to let her injury affect her performance. She continued to deliver the nuanced, emotionally complex portrayal that would become one of her most celebrated roles. Her ability to maintain the character's dignity and grace while dealing with physical discomfort speaks to her professionalism and dedication to her craft. The production team was so successful in concealing Tierney's condition that audiences had no idea she was injured during filming. Even today, watching her elegant movements and seemingly effortless performance, it's nearly impossible to detect any sign that she was working through such a challenging physical obstacle during those crucial weeks of production. Fact 3. Norma Shearer was Zanuck's first choice for Mrs. Muir. Studio production chief Darryl F. Zanuck had his sights set on a very different leading lady for The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, one whose career had seen better days, but who he believed could stage a remarkable comeback. Norma Shearer, the glamorous actress who had dominated Hollywood in the 1930s, was Zanuck's original choice to play the widowed Lucy Muir in what he hoped would be her triumphant return to the silver screen. By the mid-1940s, Shearer's career had significantly cooled down from her heyday when she was one of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's biggest stars and had won an Academy Award for The Divorcee in 1930. She had been largely absent from films since her husband, legendary producer Irving Thalberg, died in 1936, and Hollywood insiders were questioning whether her time in the spotlight had permanently passed. However, Zanuck saw an opportunity that others might have missed. In a memo to producer Fred Colmar and screenwriter Philip Dunn, dated June 24, 1946, Zanuck expressed his belief that Shearer still had the potential for a major career revival. He wrote that many people, including 20th Century Fox president Spyro Skouras, believed that Norma Shearer had one great picture left in her yet, and that she would make the same comeback that Joan Crawford made the previous year. Zanuck's reference to Joan Crawford was particularly significant because Crawford had just experienced a stunning career resurrection with her Oscar-winning performance in Mildred Pierce in 1945. After being labeled box office poison and dropped by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Crawford had proven that supposedly washed-up actresses could indeed make spectacular comebacks when given the right material. Unfortunately for Zanuck's vision, Shearer ultimately did not take the role, and the part went to Gene Tierney instead. Whether Shearer declined the offer or other factors intervened remains unclear. But her decision meant that audiences never got to see what might have been a fascinating reinvention of her screen persona. Fact 4. The film has no Fox fanfare. When The Ghost and Mrs. Muir begins, moviegoers expecting the familiar blast of trumpets that typically accompanies the 20th Century Fox logo are in for a surprising change. Instead of the studio's iconic fanfare that had become synonymous with major Hollywood productions, the film opens with the moody and haunting musical themes composed by Bernard Herrmann, creating an immediately different atmosphere that sets the tone for the supernatural romance to follow. This departure from standard studio practice was extremely rare for 20th Century Fox productions during the 1940s. The famous fanfare of trumpets had become such a trademark of the studio that its absence was immediately noticeable to audiences who had grown accustomed to hearing it before every Fox film. Only a small handful of other 20th Century Fox movies have ever omitted this musical signature, including prestigious productions like All About Eve, Sounder, and The Sound of Music. The decision to replace the traditional fanfare with Herrmann's original composition was a deliberate artistic choice that demonstrated the studio's confidence in both the film and its composer. Rather than starting with the bold, brassy announcement that typically signaled the beginning of a major studio picture, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir immediately draws viewers into its ethereal world with Herrmann's sweeping romantic melodies that perfectly capture the film's otherworldly romance. This unusual opening strategy proved to be incredibly effective in establishing the proper mood for the story. Herrmann's music, which flows seamlessly from the opening credits into the film itself, creates an unbroken emotional connection that helps audiences transition from the real world into the magical realm of Gull Cottage and its ghostly inhabitant. The composer's haunting themes begin working their spell on viewers from the very first moments, preparing them for a love story that exists somewhere between reality and dreams. The absence of the Fox fanfare remains one of the most distinctive aspects of the film's opening sequence and reflects the special care taken to craft every element of this beloved romantic fantasy. Fact 5. Muir means sea in Gaelic. The choice of Lucy Muir's surname was far from accidental, as it carries a deep connection to the ocean that plays such a central role in her supernatural love story. In Scots Gaelic, the word Muir translates directly to sea, creating a subtle but meaningful link between the character and the maritime world that defines both her cottage home and her ghostly captain. This linguistic connection becomes even more significant when you consider the old sailor's tradition of being married to the sea. Throughout maritime history, sailors have often described their relationship with the ocean in romantic terms, saying that the sea was the only woman they ever truly loved, or that they were wed to the waves rather than to any earthly bride. This poetic concept appears in countless sea shanties, naval literature, and sailor folklore across many cultures. The name choice creates multiple layers of meaning within the story's romantic framework. Lucy Muir, a widow seeking a new life by the seaside, literally bears the name of the sea itself. When she falls in love with Captain Daniel Gregg, a man whose entire existence was devoted to ocean voyages and seafaring adventures, the connection becomes even more profound. In essence, the sea-named woman finds herself drawn to a man who was himself married to the sea during his mortal life. This clever wordplay extends beyond simple symbolism to reflect the story's deeper themes about the relationship between the living and the departed, the temporal and the eternal. Just as the sea is both beautiful and dangerous, nurturing and destructive, the romance between Lucy and the captain exists in a space between worlds that mirrors the dual nature of the ocean itself. Whether author R.A. Dick, whose real name was Josephine Leslie, deliberately chose this Gaelic connection, or it emerged from her intuitive understanding of the story's maritime themes, the surname Muir adds an extra dimension of authenticity and meaning to this tale of love that transcends the boundaries between life and death. Fact 6. Bernard Herrmann called it his Max Steiner score. Bernard Herrmann, the legendary composer behind some of Hollywood's most innovative film scores, made a surprising confession about his work on The Ghost and Mrs. Muir that reveals just how different this project was from his usual approach. Herrmann himself described the score as his Max Steiner score, referring to the legendary composer who was known for his lush, romantic, and melody-driven film music that dominated Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s. This comparison was particularly striking because Herrmann had built his reputation on doing exactly the opposite of what Max Steiner represented. While Steiner was famous for his sweeping, emotional themes and traditional orchestral arrangements, Herrmann typically favored more modern, experimental approaches that often avoided conventional melodic structures. His scores for films like Citizen Kane and later Psycho were groundbreaking precisely because they rejected the romantic, melody-heavy style that Steiner had perfected. For The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, however, Herrmann deliberately embraced the very techniques he usually avoided. He created long-lined leitmotifs, which are recurring musical themes associated with specific characters or ideas, and allowed himself to indulge in a florid romanticism that was completely unlike his typical work. The score features sweeping melodies that rise and fall like ocean waves, lush orchestral arrangements that perfectly capture the film's ethereal romance, and emotional themes that support the love story in ways that were more traditional than experimental. Herrmann later regarded this score as one of his finest achievements, despite or perhaps because of its departure from his usual style. The composer, who was known for his perfectionist approach and strong opinions about film music, seemed to take particular pride in proving that he could master the romantic style just as effectively as his more modern approaches. His willingness to step outside his comfort zone resulted in what many consider one of the most beautiful and emotionally affecting film scores ever written. Fact 7. Edward Mulhare spent 2 hours in makeup daily. Edward Mulhare's transformation into the dashing Captain Daniel Gregg for the television series required a grueling daily routine that tested even the most patient actor's endurance. Every single filming day, Mulhare had to arrive at the studio early to spend 2 full hours in the makeup chair, while skilled technicians carefully applied fake whiskers to create the captain's distinctive seafaring appearance. The demanding makeup process was necessary because the tight production schedule of a weekly television series made it impossible for Mulhare to grow and maintain his own beard. Unlike feature films, which might have weeks or months between shooting periods, television shows operated on relentless deadlines that required actors to be camera-ready at a moment's notice. Growing a real beard would have created continuity problems if Mulhare needed to appear clean-shaven for other roles or public appearances between filming sessions. The fake whiskers had to be meticulously glued to Mulhare's face piece by piece to create a natural-looking beard that would hold up under the hot studio lights and close-up camera work. This delicate process couldn't be rushed, as any visible seams or poorly attached pieces would be immediately obvious to television viewers. The makeup artists had to ensure that the facial hair looked authentic from every angle and remained secure throughout long days of filming. Mulhare himself acknowledged the challenge of sitting still for such extended periods, telling a columnist from the Evening Sun in February 1969 that he would occasionally nap during the process, though this wasn't always possible given the precision required for the application. The actor's willingness to endure this daily ordeal demonstrates his commitment to bringing the captain to life in a way that honored both the original film and the expectations of television audiences. Despite the time-consuming nature of this routine, Mulhare maintained his professionalism throughout the series' 2-season run, never allowing the demanding makeup schedule to affect his performance as the charming ghostly sea captain. Fact 8. Charles Nelson Reilly made Captain Terror a game show gag. Charles Nelson Reilly's portrayal of the cowardly Claymore Gregg on The Ghost and Mrs. Muir became so memorable that he carried his character's most distinctive trait into his real-life television appearances on other shows. Reilly, who played Captain Gregg's bumbling great-nephew who was constantly terrified of his ghostly ancestor, transformed this fear into a recurring comedy bit during his frequent appearances as a panelist on the popular game show Match Game. On The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Claymore Gregg served as the local town clerk and landlord of Gull Cottage, but his most defining characteristic was his absolute terror whenever the captain made his presence known. This fear provided much of the show's physical comedy, as Reilly would jump, stammer, and flee whenever Edward Mulhare's ghostly sea captain appeared or spoke to him. The running joke became one of the series' most beloved elements, showcasing Reilly's exceptional talent for comedic timing and physical humor. When Reilly became a regular panelist on Match Game during the 1970s, he cleverly brought this signature bit with him to the game show format. During his appearances on the program, hosted by Gene Rayburn, Reilly would occasionally reference his terror of the captain in his trademark flamboyant style, delighting audiences who remembered his role from the supernatural sitcom. These references served as both nostalgic callbacks for fans of The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and as examples of Reilly's ability to create memorable comedy from his previous work. This crossover between fictional character traits and real-life television appearances was relatively unusual for actors of that era, but it demonstrated Reilly's understanding of how to connect with audiences across different shows and formats. His willingness to reference his Ghost and Mrs. Muir character helped keep the memory of the series alive even after it had been cancelled, while also establishing him as one of television's most recognizable comedic personalities. Fact 9. Sean Connery almost starred in a 1990s remake. Nearly 4 decades after the original film enchanted audiences, Sean Connery came tantalizingly close to stepping into the role of Captain Daniel Gregg for a modern remake that would have brought The Ghost and Mrs. Muir to a new generation of moviegoers. In 1990, 20th Century Fox was actively developing plans to resurrect the beloved supernatural romance with 2 of Hollywood's biggest stars attached to the project. The studio had approached Sean Connery, fresh off his success as Indiana Jones's father in The Last Crusade, to play the ghostly sea captain, while Michelle Pfeiffer was being courted for the role of Mrs. Muir. This casting choice made considerable sense, as both actors were at the height of their careers and had recently demonstrated their on-screen chemistry in The Russia House, a Cold War thriller that had just been released. The timing seemed perfect for such an ambitious remake, with both stars willing to commit to the project and the studio eager to capitalize on their proven appeal as a romantic pairing. Fox executives believed that Connery's natural charisma and commanding presence would bring a different but equally compelling interpretation to the captain's character, while Pfeiffer's combination of beauty and dramatic skill seemed ideal for the complex role of the widowed Mrs. Muir. However, the remake plans came to an abrupt halt when The Russia House failed to perform as expected at the box office. The disappointing financial results made studio executives nervous about reuniting Connery and Pfeiffer so soon after their previous collaboration had underperformed commercially. Rather than risk another potential disappointment, Fox decided to shelve The Ghost and Mrs. Muir remake indefinitely. According to industry reports, the project was still considered to be in the pipeline as late as 1997, but the remake never materialized. This missed opportunity means that audiences never got to see how Connery's interpretation of the captain would have compared to Rex Harrison's original performance. Opportunity means that audiences never got to see how Connery's interpretation of the captain would have compared to Rex Harrison's original performance. Fact 10. Richard Ney was fired and replaced by George Sanders. The role of Miles Fairley, the charming but deceptive writer who threatens to come between Lucy and her ghostly captain, went through a significant casting change that dramatically altered the character's impact on the final film. Richard Ney, a relatively young actor who had gained attention for his work in Mrs. Miniver, was originally selected to play the smooth-talking children's book author who sweeps Lucy off her feet during her trip to London. Ney had already been cast and was preparing for the role when complications arose with his filming schedule for another 20th Century Fox production called Ivy, which was being made simultaneously in 1947. The scheduling conflict created an impossible situation where Ney would not be able to fulfill his commitments to both films, forcing him to make a difficult choice between the 2 projects. However, according to film historian Lee Server's research documented in his book Screenwriter, Words Become Pictures, the situation was more complicated than a simple scheduling conflict. Server reveals that Ney was actually fired from The Ghost and Mrs. Muir for being inadequate in the part, suggesting that his performance during the early stages of production was not meeting the director's expectations. The departure of Ney, whether voluntary or involuntary, opened the door for George Sanders to step into the role of Miles Fairley. Sanders brought a completely different energy to the character, transforming what might have been a more straightforward romantic rival into something far more sophisticated and menacing. With his distinctive voice, suave demeanor, and natural ability to portray charming villains, Sanders made Miles Fairley a much more formidable opponent for Captain Greg's affections. This casting change proved to be fortuitous for the film, as Sanders' performance added layers of complexity to the love triangle that might not have existed with a younger, less experienced actor. His portrayal of the duplicitous writer created a more compelling dramatic tension that enhanced the supernatural romance. Fact 11. The film was shot entirely in California. Despite English setting, one of the most impressive achievements of The Ghost and Mrs. Muir is how convincingly it portrays the English countryside and coastline without ever leaving the state of California. Despite the story being set in London and the fictional seaside village of White Cliff by the sea on the English coast, every single scene in the movie was filmed using California locations that were carefully chosen and dressed to resemble early 1900s Britain. The decision to shoot entirely in California was driven by practical considerations of budget and production efficiency rather than artistic preference. Transporting an entire Hollywood film crew, equipment, and cast to England in 1947 would have been enormously expensive and logistically complicated, especially in the post-war period when international travel was still challenging and costly for large productions. Studio executives determined that they could achieve the same visual results while maintaining much tighter control over costs and scheduling. The primary filming locations included the scenic areas of Palos Verdes and Monterey, California, which provided the dramatic clifftop settings that were essential to the story's romantic atmosphere. Some of the most memorable seaside scenes were shot in February 1947 on a beach near Stillwater Cove in Pebble Beach, where the rugged Pacific coastline served as a convincing stand-in for the English Channel shores. Cinematographer Charles Lang Jr., who was brought in from Paramount specifically for this production, deserves considerable credit for making these California locations look authentically English. His careful use of lighting, camera angles, and atmospheric effects created the illusion that audiences were watching scenes filmed on the remote English coast rather than along the central Pacific coastline. The success of this location substitution demonstrates the skill of the production team and the natural beauty of California's varied landscapes, which have served as convincing doubles for locations around the world in countless Hollywood films. Fact 12. Harry Nilsson guest starred as a singer in the TV series. The Ghost and Mrs. Muir television series featured one of the most unusual and memorable guest appearances in sitcom history when Harry Nilsson, the acclaimed singer-songwriter behind hits like Everybody's Talkin' and Without You, took on a rare acting role that perfectly matched his musical talents. In what was essentially a case of perfect casting, Nilsson played a singer who comes to stay at Gull Cottage, allowing the famous musician to showcase both his acting abilities and his distinctive voice within the show's supernatural comedy format. This guest appearance was particularly significant because Nilsson was primarily known as a recording artist rather than an actor, making his television role a unique crossover moment for someone who spent most of his career behind the microphone in recording studios. During the late 1960s, when The Ghost and Mrs. Muir was airing, Nilsson was gaining recognition as one of the most innovative and talented singer-songwriters of his generation, with a voice that could handle everything from tender ballads to experimental rock compositions. The decision to cast Nilsson in this role demonstrated the show's commitment to bringing authentic musical talent to episodes that called for singing performances, rather than hiring an actor who could sort of carry a tune or dubbing in a professional singer's voice later. The producers made the smart choice to bring in someone whose musical credentials were unquestionable. This approach gave the episode a level of authenticity that enhanced both the comedy and the musical elements of the story. Nilsson's appearance on The Ghost and Mrs. Muir represents one of the few times that the celebrated musician ventured into the world of television acting, making it a particularly noteworthy moment for fans of both the show and his music. The episode stands as an example of how the series occasionally attracted high-profile guest stars who brought their own unique talents to the charming world of Schooner Bay, Maine. Fact 13. Edward Mulhare previously replaced Rex Harrison on Broadway. Edward Mulhare's casting as Captain Daniel Gregg in the Ghost and Mrs. Muir television series created a fascinating theatrical connection that few viewers at the time would have realized. This was actually the second time in Mulher's career that he had stepped into a role originally created by Rex Harrison, establishing an unusual pattern of one actor following in the footsteps of another across different mediums and productions. The first instance of this theatrical succession occurred in 1957 during the original Broadway run of My Fair Lady, the legendary musical adaptation of George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion. Rex Harrison had originated the role of Professor Henry Higgins on Broadway, delivering the iconic performance that would later earn him an Academy Award when he reprised the role in the film version. However, during the show's extended Broadway run, Harrison eventually needed to leave the production, creating an opportunity for his understudy to take center stage. Edward Mulher had been serving as Harrison's understudy throughout the original production, learning every nuance of the demanding role, and waiting for his chance to perform the part that Harrison had made famous. When Harrison departed, Mulher stepped into the role of Henry Higgins and went on to play the character in more than 1,000 performances opposite both Julie Andrews and Sally Ann Howes, who alternated in the role of Eliza Doolittle. This Broadway experience gave Mulher valuable insight into Harrison's acting style and stage presence, knowledge that would prove useful years later when he was called upon to take over another Harrison role for television. The transition from Henry Higgins to Captain Gregg represented a remarkable career coincidence that demonstrated Mulher's ability to successfully inhabit characters that had been defined by one of Britain's most distinguished actors. Both roles required similar qualities of charm, authority, and theatrical presence that made Mulher an ideal successor to Harrison's legacy in these memorable characters. Fact 14. The TV series revealed the ghost to the housekeeper in episode 47, one of the most significant character developments in the Ghost and Mrs. Muir television series occurred near the very end of its run, when the writers finally decided to let Martha Grant, the faithful housekeeper played by Rita Shaw, in on the supernatural secret that had been the show's central premise for nearly 2 full seasons. For 46 episodes, Martha had remained completely unaware that Captain Daniel Gregg was haunting Gull Cottage, despite all the strange occurrences and mysterious conversations happening around her. Throughout the series, Martha's obliviousness to the captain's presence had been a consistent source of comedy and dramatic irony. While Mrs. Muir, her children, and the cowardly Claymore Gregg could all see and interact with the ghostly sea captain, Martha would witness floating objects, mysterious sounds, and seemingly one-sided conversations without ever realizing that a 19th-century spirit was responsible for these peculiar events. Her logical explanations for supernatural phenomena and her practical approach to the household's odd happenings provided a grounding element that balanced the show's fantastical premise. The decision to finally reveal Captain Gregg to Martha came in episode 47 of the series' 50 total episodes, making it one of the last major storylines before the show's cancellation. This timing suggests that the writers may have been preparing for the series' conclusion and wanted to resolve one of the longest-running mysteries for longtime viewers who had watched Martha remain in the dark for so long. The revelation marked a significant shift in the show's dynamic, as Martha had served as the representative of the normal, non-supernatural world throughout the series. Her acceptance of the captain's existence would have fundamentally changed the household's relationships and eliminated one of the show's primary sources of situational comedy. The timing of this disclosure so close to the series finale meant that viewers got to see this major character development without having to watch the show completely restructure its basic premise. Fact 15. Hope Lange won back-to-back Emmys. Despite show's cancellation, Hope Lange achieved one of the most remarkable paradoxes in television history when she won consecutive Emmy Awards for Outstanding Performance by an Actress in a Leading Role in a Comedy Series for both 1968 through 69 and 1969 through 70, even as The Ghost and Mrs. Muir was struggling so badly in the ratings that it was cancelled not once, but twice during those same award-winning years. This unusual situation created the strange spectacle of an actress being honored by the television industry's most prestigious awards while simultaneously watching her show get rejected by viewers and network executives. The first Emmy win came during the show's initial run on NBC, which had already decided to cancel the series at the end of its first season, despite Lange's critically acclaimed performance as the widowed writer Carolyn Muir. The series was rescued from cancellation when ABC picked it up for a second season, giving Lange another opportunity to showcase the charm and emotional depth that had impressed Emmy voters the previous year. However, even this reprieve couldn't save the show from its ratings struggles, as it continued to face tough competition from established hits like Family Affair on CBS and failed to find a loyal audience despite being moved to different time slots. Lange's second consecutive Emmy win came as ABC was simultaneously making the decision to cancel The Ghost and Mrs. Muir permanently, creating the ironic situation where she was being celebrated for her excellence in a role that television audiences were apparently not watching in sufficient numbers. Her back-to-back victories represented a clear recognition from industry professionals that her performance transcended the show's commercial limitations. This disconnect between critical recognition and popular success highlighted the difference between artistic merit and mass appeal in television, demonstrating that exceptional acting could be acknowledged and rewarded even when the show itself failed to connect with viewers in the competitive landscape of late 1960s television programming.